Welcome to Money Secrets with Bill and Mike.
I'm Bill Alexander.
And I'm Mike Tove. Bill, I think it's time for us to talk about something really important, retirement accounts.
Truthfully, I don't know that there's anything more important, whether you're young or older, in terms of how to deal with retirement.
Yeah. So this is going to be a two-parter, actually. I think we've got so much to cover. We're going to do some this week, and then we're going to probably pick it up next week as well.
Well, there's so much that people need to really understand about retirement accounts that we just can't fit it all into one show.
I know.
So we have to break it up into two sessions. But that just means you have to come back next week.
Well, that's right. So get yourself a cup of coffee, take a few, and then come on back and settle in. And we're going to be right back, and we're going to talk to you about some of this. Stay tuned. Hey, welcome back.
Well, Mike, I know it's important for folks to know. Well, first you got to start out with what is a retirement account?
Oh, yeah.
So let's start there.
So let's start with that. Well, in 1974, Congress gave us something called the Individual Retirement Account. And it was originally passed with ERISA, which is basically a very complex bunch of laws that nobody understands,
Federal
except
law,
maybe lawyers.
No question about it. Federal law. ERISA is really important. But this is the transition from basically pension plans to having to make your own retirement.
And so one of the things that I run into a lot is confusion. Is that number one, an IRA, let's talk about those for a minute. An IRA is not an investment. It is tax law. And any kind of a financial account, whether it's a bank account or a brokerage account or an annuity or even real estate trust, any of those can be IRA, and any of those don't have to be IRA.
All right, so an IRA is an individual retirement account. So it's one that a person individually controls and invests in, but it's not an investment.
No, and the truth is that it's called qualified because having this qualifies that particular account for certain tax
Well, basically
conditions.
You can contribute, and what you contribute is not taxed to you that year, and that's important.
Right, but then of course comes the other shoe. And when IRAs were originally invented, it wasn't always that way.
Two shoes, one good, one bad.
Right.
Obviously, while the money is sitting in your retirement account, taxation on that account is deferred.
Correct.
And defer means you're going to get taxed at some point, but not, it allows to sit there for years, hopefully invested well, and there's no income tax on it while it's being invested.
And so people understand the value of this, something we call triple compounding, that you get growth on principal, plus growth on growth, plus growth on the part that otherwise would have been lost to taxes.
Absolutely. Well, it is important that folks understand, particularly with an individual retirement accounts, that they can invest it in many, many different kinds of ways.
And actually, when it is an IRA, if they put the money in one place and then they don't like it, they can move it to another place
At any time.
At any time without any tax consequences. And the only taxable event is if they physically remove the money and take possession of it.
Well, actually, you can even take possession of it as long as you put it back within 60 days.
And only once a year.
One time.
Only one time a year.
One time a year.
But in terms of, I was referring to actually taking it and
as a
spending.
distribution.
Yes, it's called spending.
Right.
And if you do that before you're 59 and a half years old,
bad.
It's a 10% tax penalty. And
well, actually, there is an exception to the rule.
Well, yes, there is. So,
and that, we have to say, for folks who may have a medical emergency, they can actually annuitize their retirement account and not. Now they still have the ordinary income tax. But not the 10% penalty.
Yeah, and so there are ways of getting out from under that, under certain circumstances.
Exceptions to the main rule.
Right. But fundamentally, if you have an IRA and you're in your 40s or early 50s and you want the money because you're going to buy a new car, or you're going to put a new roof on the house, you're going to take that emergency vacation because the cruise came up and you had to go.
That's
not a good thing. No.
Well, plus you need to keep that money in there for your later years. That's really important for
Well,
folks.
there's that too. But then we have other types of qualified accounts. So you've got your IRAs, but what everybody knows about as much as anything else is the 401k.
Right, and of course that is very, very different. And as we've talked about, there are lots of other retirement accounts, 403bs, there's SEPs, and there are others as well.
457, 412I.
Sure, there are lots of
all
different
those.
ones, but I think we need to focus on the 401k versus the
The IRA,
IRA.
right.
So a 401k is established by an employer.
Right.
It's not you, and I know you have some real strong and valid points as it relates to how to contribute wisely to a 401k.
Yes.
So what is that?
Okay, so fundamentally, you want to make sure that you are getting every penny that's been promised to you in matching money from your employer, for the simple reason that if you don't, it's like going to your boss and saying, "Boss, listen, you're paying me too much, cut my salary back."
Right. In other words, most employers do offer a match, and with a 401k, they can match anything from 1%, 2%, 3%, all the way up to 6%.
Right.
Although very few employers actually contribute at the highest levels. More common would be 3 or 4%.
Correct.
And that's based on matching what you contribute.
That's right. And so that's the reason why you want to make sure you put in enough to get that. But one of the advices that I give clients is don't put in more than is necessary to get your full match, because you give up a lot of control when you do that, and unless there is a distinct advantage in giving up the control,
Well, I think
it's
it's
not a good idea.
important for employees to understand that your investment options are very limited with 401ks. They're only those options that the employer has actually given to you, which is not true with any of the other retirement accounts, particularly IRAs, where you have far more control over what you do with your money to make it grow.
Correct. And they control what you get. So if the employer decides, hey, we don't want to offer that investment choice that you were loving before, I'm sorry, you're out.
Well, so it's important for folks to understand that the employers don't have to offer any contribution, and
Correct.
some don't. And if they don't, you probably shouldn't even contribute to their
Right.
401k. You should contribute to it a different way.
Right.
But if they offer 3%, make sure they deduct 3% from your salary so you get their full match. That's really important.
All right. So we're going to take a short break and we're going to come back and pick this up. Stay tuned. Welcome back. All right.
Well, Mike, you know, with every retirement there comes a time to pay the piper. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And we know that there is a penalty if you take your retirement account before 59 and a half, but that there's some point where the government says, guys, you got to start taking money out of the account. And that happens at 70 and a half.
Right.
Which sounds sort of weird, but that's what they do. But that's called required minimum distributions.
Right.
And that actually is a little more complex than people really understand.
Yeah, right.
Explain
Okay.
it for us.
Right. Okay. So a couple of myths about required minimum distributions. First of all, it's not a fixed percent. It changes every year, and it's actually not percentages at all. It's actually a number that you divide by, but that's a math
But
thing.
it's based on your age.
It's based on your age, and it's based on your age as of December 31st of each successive year.
And it has to do with life expectancy, obviously.
Well,
To some degree.
Yeah, it hasn't for a long time, because the divisor for a 70-year-old is 27.4.
It goes, what, all the way to 115, doesn't it?
115, and so I don't think a 70-year-old has an
government's-
average life expectancy of 27 and a
The
half years.
government's very optimistic.
Well, they changed it back in 2003. It was higher, and then it doesn't
Got
matter.
Well, tell us how it works.
So here's how it works, and here's where the trick is, if you will, is that when you calculate a required minimum distribution, the money that you're going to be taking is based on how much the account was worth last year on the 31st of December, but it comes out typically in December of this year.
Okay, so it's last year's number.
Right.
With this year's percentage.
Right. Now, the reason they do that is because they want it to be based on January 1st of this year, but nobody is opened on January 1st. So they say, well, that's okay, let's just back it up to the first day before.
Okay.
However,
what happens if you lose money during the year?
That's a problem, because the percentage that's coming out, the dollar amount that comes out is the same. And so, for example, just hypothetically, if your required minimum distribution is 5%, which you have to be in your early 80s to get there, but if it's 5% and then the account value loses half of its value over the course of the year, your minimum distribution just jumped to 10%.
So in other words, your required minimum distribution, the dollar amount is actually based on January 1st, if the banks were open or the accounts were open. But in essence, the first day of the year, so that's when the dollar amount is actually determined, because they know how big your account is and they know what the percentage is.
Exactly. And you can take it any time that year.
Right.
But when do most people learn about this? Is they
at the end of the year.
At the end of the year, they'll get some kind of a reminder letter from their financial custodian that says, hey, you have to take your minimum distribution and this is how much it is. And
so bottom line is, if I have a bad year and I've lost, say, 15 to 20%, does that change my number?
Nope.
So that means as a percentage,
it just went up.
It just went up,
right.
And that's bad, obviously.
That is very bad. And what's unfortunate is that people somehow think that the reverse, that if things are going up, that it counterbalances it, but it doesn't.
Okay.
Mathematically, going backwards or going down has a bigger impact than going up. And so,
well, obviously, a lot of folks like the idea of their account growing.
Yeah.
That's really important, because clearly if you do well with your investments, your growth is more than what the distribution is in those early years of required distributions.
Well, if it's done properly, and we're going to get into this a little later, if it's done properly, an IRA should actually grow throughout your life, even though you are taking the required minimum distributions.
Right.
Which, and again, we'll get into more details on the next session, but sets up a two-edged sword. One, it's a really good idea to be able to have something to pass on, or something that's there for a rainy day, but
yeah, and what I have seen, and I'm sure you can talk about this, but when your retirement account is invested properly with good advice, most people don't see any significant diminution in that account until they're in their mid to late 80s.
Correct. And there are even ways of doing it better than that. But yeah, and then you have to be careful about how it distributes out. However, let's back this one up for a second, because there are a few other aspects of IRAs versus 401ks, and I think that something that you and I were talking about in the break is really important, is how each one is treated under the law in terms of protection.
Well, that is important. And 401ks and IRAs are different. 401ks they're protected under federal law, which is called ERISA. That means that a creditor cannot take away your 401k even if they have a valid claim against you. So that's really important protections. IRAs, on the other hand, is based on state law as to whether it's a protected asset. Now in North Carolina, it's a protected asset based on state law, but in many states, it is not a protected asset, and creditors can actually take your IRA account away from you. So live in North Carolina.
Right.
Now there's some other differences
states,
too. I mean, for instance, you cannot change your 401k beneficiary without spousal consent. In other words, to the degree, let's say you want to leave it to your children, your spouse must agree to it and sign the form. Right. That's not true with an IRA in North Carolina. Some states do require spousal consent for IRAs as well, but it's based on the state law and not federal law.
Right. So stay tuned. We're going to have to take a short break. We'll be right back, and we're going to start wrapping this up. Welcome back.
Well, Mike, you know, we were talking about 401ks, and one of the advantages with the 401k, if you're still employed by your employer at age 70, there are a lot of folks who are not retiring until they're in their mid-70s and sometimes even later.
And
so what's the advantage?
Oh yeah, because one of the distinct advantages with a 401k, if you are still working
for that employer
at 70 and a half, is that you can defer the required minimum distributions.
And you can't do that with an IRA.
No, you cannot. But you also cannot do that with a 401k that you had from your previous employer.
Right.
It's only your current employer.
Right. And of course, if you still have your money in your 401k, you're very limited with your investments. So what can I do with my 401k after I'm retired?
Right. Well, therein lies the trick, because so much of this comes back, we've said this so many times, is that it always is about it depends, right?
Sure.
So it depends on what an individual's needs are, an individual's circumstances, what their income, what their time horizons are.
Well, we know that with an IRA that it's a far more flexible an account when, because you just have more control over it. You can invest it in many different things.
Yeah, and you know, and this is kind of coming back to where our Money Secret's going to be, because I think there's a couple of things from the Money Secret standpoint. First of all, there's enough complexity here, and for example, there are limited times when certain retirement accounts, 401ks, in North Carolina are actually exempt from state income tax. Okay, we won't get into that here, but generally the people that have that know it. Yeah, but there's so many other aspects to this. How you should take income, when you should take income. There are times when it is a really good idea to take bigger distributions from your IRAs than the minimum required.
That has to be our really important money secret, is that there are many times when it makes good financial sense to take more than your required minimum distributions. One of the biggest mistakes I see, and I know you do too, is that seniors don't like tax, and so they're told time and again only to take required minimum distributions and not take more than that.
Right. And we're going to actually, in the second session, we're going to actually come back with some examples on that. But there's so many different ways of doing this. And there are ways, and you know this, there are ways of taking an IRA and actually converting an IRA from 100% taxable on inheritance to 100% not taxable on inheritance.
Right. But I think we really need to get to the money secret, Mike.
Right.
And obviously, for one, in most circumstances, once you retire, you tend to do better if you convert a 401k to an IRA.
Absolutely.
But then how you take your distributions can be very, very different. That's where people need good counsel, because nothing's automatic. Everyone's situation is different.
Right. And so this is our common money secret then, isn't it? Is that it really is, and so many people try to be do-it-yourselfers on this, because what they don't understand is the choices that are available, or how to structure things in a constructive way.
Right. Well, you know, next week we're going to come back and talk about when are those times where you may want to take more than required minimum distributions. How can that help you financially? Right. And there are a number of different ways.
As well as circumstances when, for good reasons, you don't want to, and then how do you handle that, plus the inheritance side of things. Okay, Bill, so, you know, we're coming out with a new book, aren't we?
We sure are.
And boy, we've been working on it.
Title's great.
Money Secrets with Bill and Mike. And so it will be available pretty soon, and anybody that is interested in it should reach out to us, because we will have our copies.
The real trick with the book is simply that we can't say everything that we need to say on this television program. Our book allows us to expound on many of the topics that we talk about, which is really helpful.
Right. So at any event, so my name is Mike Tove. I am a financial planner, and I can be reached at 800-363-2296, and my company is called AIN Services.
And I'm Bill Alexander. I'm an attorney with W.G. Alexander and Associates. We're a law firm that focuses on estate planning, elder law, and asset protection. I would invite you to come to our monthly seminars on the second Wednesday of each month on long-term care and government assistance, along with asset protection, and would invite you to listen to my radio show, Asset Protection Today, at 11 o'clock each Saturday morning on WPTF 680 AM.
Thanks for watching. We will see you next week with part 2 of retirement accounts. See you then.